Hey, Femi.
Hey.
Purple's really good on you, man.
Yeah.
Bye, Femi.
Hi everyone and welcome to another Sunday Roast. I hope you're all very well. We have some wonderful guests with us once again, old friends of the show, I believe. Lisa, can you tell us about yourself and then we'll move on to...
My name's Lisa Burton. I am the Vice Chair of Remain in Spain and I am on the National Council of European Movement UK. I live in the Canary Islands, but I'm also a business owner and I have an export and distribution company based in Oxfordshire in the UK.
Which is struggling a bit because of Brexit, no doubt.
We've had our for
Femi,
Brexit.
Femi, can you tell us about yourself for maybe somebody who's unfamiliar with her? I think it's impossible, but go ahead.
I'm Femi. I'm a political campaigner, anti-Brexiteer.
Fantastic. My wonderful co-host, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm an author, historian, and just all-round anti-Brexiteer. And my wonderful co-host, Max.
Hi guys, I'm Max. I run the Robespierre channel. I talk about Brexit and generally British politics. So, Alex, what's our first topic for today?
Let's just go straight into the deep end. How's everything going in Northern Ireland after those lovely announcements by members of the DUP today?
Yeah, so well, there's been I think they've increased the security level or the risk level in Northern Ireland. The police have said that there's a risk of, I think, as loyalist paramilitaries. Because they're concerned about what's happening with the Northern Ireland Protocol or the new Windsor Framework. But what's also interesting this week was we had Kate Hoey, former Labour MP, who's now a member of the House of Lords. She was put in there by Boris Johnson in 2019. She was comparing...
Well,
sorry, go on.
Oh, I was in... Well, we've just heard that there's a increased threat level in Northern Ireland, you say? It's a highly likely of a terrorist attack? Well, whatever Kate Hoey says, I hope that it's calming everything down. I hope that it makes sure that everyone feels safe and that doesn't really agitate in any way.
Well, I imagine,
I trust her.
So she compared those who are joining the assembly, who want to rejoin the assembly, and maybe the British government as well, as well, she compared them with Vichy France in World War II.
If Stormont goes back with this present Windsor framework, they in fact would be almost like what happened during the war with the Vichy government, where all those MLAs would be collaborators with a kind of colonial government, taking foreign laws from a foreign legislature governing much of our economy in Northern Ireland and keeping us in a foreign customs code.
In this case, collaborating with the EU, which is the same as Nazi Germany in some way, I believe. And she delivered that speech. Yeah, it wasn't on Twitter or in some interview. It was in the House of Lords, and it got me thinking. Maybe the House of Lords needs some reform. Maybe a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Well, first of all, I'm waiting for 36 MPs to write a letter and demand that she apologise, as happened with Gary Lineker for even referencing 1930s Germany and not mentioning the word Nazi. So we should say that. But yeah, I mean, Kate Hoey, she's always been someone who's used extremist language as far as I'm concerned. And the worrying part, I feel it's deliberate. I do feel that it's deliberate. But the Northern Ireland Protocol, I feel, is fantastic. I wish I was a business owner in Northern Ireland now instead of England, put it that way. I think it's deeply unfair to the rest of the UK now and I do think, though, that it's going to be the little strand that helps to unravel Brexit that bit further, because how can something be so amazingly good for Northern Ireland and not for the rest of the UK? And it's all about equivalence, apparently. So equivalence works both ways, So I'm hoping that will come out of it. But it's always been a difficult situation, but the people of Northern Ireland support this deal. And I think that's, what people really need to be focusing on. It's the unionists are just backstabbing and fighting because they're trying to chase this impossible fantasy of Brexit, which I think they would be a hard border in Ireland, and that's never going to happen. So yeah, it's interesting times. But I wait for the uproar about what Kate Hoey has said today. It is in particular, GB News is going to be all over that. Yeah.
Is it a news channel? I don't know. Femi?
No.
I've always had a question because, unionists get a really, really bad rap on this side of the Irish Sea because when we think unionists, we think DUP. We think the same people who took the 1 billion from Theresa May to support Brexit, and ultimately they're the unionists who destroyed the union by breaking apart the Irish Sea. And they're also not democratic because they supported Brexit when Northern Ireland didn't want Brexit, so they're not democratic or unionists. They're just P. But they can't possibly represent all unionists in Northern Ireland. There must be unionists in Northern Ireland who want to be part of the UK, but recognize that recognized a long time ago that Brexit was going off the rails and would break apart the union. And they can see that language from people like Kate Hoey is just adding fuel to a fire that their leaders started.
There is the Ulster Unionist Party, which is more moderate than the DUP, and the UUP haven't been very vocal of the Northern Ireland Protocol in support of the protocol, but they have been, saying no, we need to have a better relationship with Europe. We support the union, but we can't be tearing up these international agreements. So the UUP are in a difficult, unfortunately, they're much smaller than the DUP at the moment. They used to be the main party on the union side in Northern Ireland, but they seem to be more pragmatic when it comes to Brexit and the protocol. But the DUP are completely ideological.
We have to be kind of careful when we speak about unions, like when we speak about Tories, really. We know that not every Conservative voter thinks and feels the same way as the current Conservative government as well. So yeah, fair point there. There will be unionists in the public who are very happy with this deal and want to just let everything go by nice and peacefully and calmly. So absolutely that.
What can you tell me about Kate Hoey's background, Lisa?
Well, she's an ardent Brexiteer. Femi will know her history more. She's always been around. She's gone quiet recently, but certainly in the early Brexit years, a very, very hard Brexiteer, wanted to leave with no deal, go to the World Trade Organization standards. She's always been highly outspoken on the Northern Ireland issue. So she's just what I would call a Brexit extremist. There's no common sense policy. There's no common sense kind of attitude in her at all. She is really very much a Brexit extremist. Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Femi?
Yeah. I mean, when you see that she's somebody who is supposedly, she was originally in the Labour Party, and yet she was going on little boat cruises with Nigel Farage. She's on that wing. She's what we used to call blue Labour, which basically means we like high taxes, but we are also racist, so don't worry.
Yes.
And that's where I'd put her.
I did a video on her for Friday, and it was really interesting because she voted against same-sex marriage. She's pro fox hunting. She voted, and then she's a Brexiteer as well. Like, she does. If you didn't know she was a member of the Labour Party, you would imagine she was a Tory, as you pointed out, Femi. Like, she's a blue Labour MP. Really, what the hell was she doing in the Labour Party?
Sounds like a spy, just not very well hidden.
But there are a few of them in the Labour Party, it seems.
Lee Anderson, 30p Lee, wasn't he also a member of a different party? Was it Labour as well?
Yeah.
Or was it? It was Labour.
Jesus.
Yeah.
He was a Labour councillor, and then, but now he's going to move on to bigger, brighter things, I think.
Yeah, I think
more
of the spotlight they hate, and when they become really, I just don't, Yeah.
Go on, Femi.
This is again a problem with our voting system because we have the economic left and right and the social left and right, and because we're forced to only choose between one or two parties, you get people like Kate Hoey that might be economically left wing but socially hard far right, and yet they somehow sneak their way into Labour. And I'm guessing that's where 30p Lee ended up. Although right now he's right on pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, I assume he's Northern, he's a minor, so he must have been pro-union. I would assume. I made comment about this, how he compares to Brian Clough. Brian Clough's the son of Nottingham. And you listen to Brian Clough and his rhetoric on socialism, and it's like, how the hell did Lee Anderson get voted in that town within such a short space of time? Brian Clough died in 2002. So, yeah, still within, easily within living memory. He's got statues outside the town, and they voted in Lee Anderson. I don't think he's going to last. I think Tories are absolutely buggered in the next general election. So, I mean, that's a nice segue.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Lee Anderson's voting history. Consistently voted against reducing the rate of corporation tax. Consistently voted against measures to reduce tax avoidance on taxation and employment. Consistently voted for more restricted regulation of trade union activities. So he's anti-union. Consistently voted against higher taxes on banks. How is this guy in any way left on anything? Social issues. Consistently voted against laws to promote human rights, welfare and benefits. For and against welfare.
Yeah, but you have to be careful
inclusive.
because those 4 are Tory policies. So there was a Tory policy to increase benefits last year. I think it was last April. And that was a Tory one where let's bring in benefits at 4% because this is inflation. But then inflation went up to 10. So he voted with the part. So sometimes his voting record will say, oh, look, he voted for benefits, but it was because it was a Tory policy, not a Labour one.
Do you hear his rant on, I think, either his YouTube channel or it was just on Twitter? He got out in the rain, in a Mac, and just started ranting at the camera how essentially he wanted people to be put in a tent in a field, forced to collect potatoes and other veg because we've got a shortage, work all day, and then go back to the tent, but you get a cold shower, and then you have to sleep there and start again the next day.
It's Lee Anderson, your parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party at the next general election. And what I'm about to say is my own personal opinion, nobody else's. I stood on this spot a few months ago, banging on about nuisance tenants throughout this lovely estate on Corsica, and the fact they were making people's lives a complete misery. Now I've been banging onto the council, banging onto the police about getting these nuisances evicted. So hopefully over the next few days we might see something. Now people will say to me, but they've got to live somewhere. That's right. So my plan would be, and again this is just my own personal opinion, is that these people who have to live somewhere, let's have them in a tent in the middle of a field, 6 o'clock every morning. Let's have them up, let's have them in the fields, picking potatoes or any current seasonable vegetables, back in the tent, cold shower, lights out, 6 o'clock, the same the next day. That would be my solution.
And that was his rant. And you're like, again, it's like, how was he part of Labour? I assume because he was a coal miner, he was probably anti anything to do with the Conservative Party.
At some point.
But maybe it was just, wolf.
But he came in on the 2019 batch, so it was like the Get Brexit Done group. So he probably didn't expect to win his seat.
There's a lot of ones came in that 2019 election, You see Steve Bray's video with Lee Anderson today. So Steve Bray, he confronted Lee Anderson outside of Parliament, and the usual, are you getting a job, to Steve, I've got a job. And he goes, what about your 100 grand job? Because, Lee Anderson has now got this £100,000 a year position with GB News. Are you going to give some of that to charity, etc.? And he goes, I am. I'm going to pay 45% tax of it.
Lee, are you going to give any of that 100,000 to charity?
Yes, 45 grand's going in income tax. It keeps funding
right, yeah.
So it's like even his language was almost like he thinks of tax as charity because obviously it helps people who have less.
So he's going to be paying a higher rate of tax than Sunak, who's only going to be paying.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, unless he's really clever and sets up an offshore company somewhere, but I think it's a bit hard with you need a lot of millions for that. 100,000 extra a year isn't going to cut it. But so, yeah, of course, he'll be paying full rate tax on anything above his 60,000. So, yeah. But it was his language was very strange, when you're giving that to charity. Well, I'm going to pay, paying 45% tax on
That
it.
is charity.
Which is strange because this is the left-wing approach. Well, we shouldn't have charities. Rich people should pay more tax. So is that what Lee Anderson was? He was tapping into his left-wing ideals from 20 years ago or something? There was another thing that I think it was Jonathan Gullis, another wonderful individual within the Conservative Party. He was pushing for, I don't know if it was him that was pushing it, but they were talking about putting refugee asylum seekers on ferry boats. Did anyone hear about that?
Yep.
And barges.
On barges.
Barges, sorry, it wasn't ferries, barges.
Oh, no. I think it was ferries as well. They were looking at every single option. So apparently last year there was an investigation into whether or not you could afford to put these people on these ferry boats or cruise ships. Essentially found out it's more expensive to do it. So they then shelved it. And then a year later, they rekindled the idea of sticking them on barges. So apparently, according to Yvette Cooper, they've been sending people around the whole of the UK with these magazines. Trying to find people with these massive barges, which they can then stick people on. It's totally insane.
I find it interesting.
The only thing I could think of is that they go on the China route, and this could be quite funny, and they just start building islands offshore, specifically with the purpose.
I mean, we can say in fairness that, the Scottish government do have Ukrainian refugees on a cruise ship, which they are trying to rehome them all, but so there's a little crossover there.
I find it interesting that they'd revive this defunct and disproven policy that the Treasury's already thrown out just before the May elections. It's a weird one.
But that's what they did with Brexit. I mean, we had an election to join the EU, or the ECC as it was then, in the 1970s, and they've decided to go back to the 1970s. When we were, a ship without a rudder, because we basically got rid of, we haven't necessarily got rid of, the people who pushed us away, of the British Empire and everything that, I'm trying to choose my words very carefully here because I don't want to spin the British Empire as anything positive, despite what Jacob Rees-Mogg ranted on about the other day.
I missed that. What did you say?
I was been defending the British Empire as a force for good and spreading democracy.
Of course.
And it's just like, and he's like, there was an element of goading people to come on and argue with him. And I'm like, bring it, bitch. I'll go on there.
Please do.
Yeah, please invite me on, Jacob, you utter arse. Because he did it with the concentration camps in South Africa. And it was absolutely amazing because I'd researched and I taught about this years ago. And basically he defended it on Question Time, suggesting that the idea of the concentration camps was a good one and it benefited people and it stopped the war and it cut it short and it wasn't that bad. And, the times were different then. And when you really get down to the detail, 50% of the deaths were under 16 inside those camps. And those camps had been deliberately set up in order to target South Africans in order to get out the guerrilla forces by stopping the supply of them. But essentially, if you were near a train track, you got arrested and chucked in jail.
Did Jacob Rees-Mogg use it was for their own defense, their own protection? Did he use that line? That was a line that's
I think he did, yeah. I can't be precise in that because it was a while since I did that video, but I think he did use that. It was to protect them from the guerrillas, and it's like, no, that's got it wrong. The guerrillas were
women and children, I believe, that were put in the camps, and it was the men who were fighting. So you weren't protecting them from their husbands and fathers.
And then you'll get the argument, oh, right, well, it was a different time back then, different standards and everything. Well, one, there was a Bible which clearly says don't kill people. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, probably one of the greatest Prime Ministers that Britain's ever come up with, actually came out in Parliament condemning it and suggesting that this was an atrocious act of barbarism upon the population of South Africa and was totally out of line. So it's like, right, so the Prime Minister at the time thought it was outrageous and Jacob Rees-Mogg is saying, no, it was fine back then, so we shouldn't judge it too badly now.
Lloyd George is more progressive 100 years ago than Jacob
Rees-Mogg.
Many people are now, actually. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's carry on with this topic. General election. So we've got May elections coming up, and we're going to have a general election at some point soon. Can Rishi Sunak win this? Femi, what are your thoughts? How are Conservatives going to fare in the next general election?
So I think I can confidently say that the Conservatives will lose the next election. As for how badly they lose, I think their best bet would probably be to do it if they called the election roughly around June, because anything later than that, then it'll start to get heading towards if people can smell December, because that's when Brexit will start to go crazy again. Because on our current path, remember last year you heard Jacob Rees-Mogg say that the Brexit import checks would be an act of self-harm, which is why we're not going to do it. And we're going to save £1 billion. Well, those got delayed until December 2023, i.e. this year. And he himself said that it would add up to 71% of the cost of certain foods. And so if that gets to be around the corner, then you either have the smell of that about to happen, i.e. the Tories will starve you if you vote for them, or they'll have to delay it again, in which case they'll be the party that again refused to get Brexit done, and Labour will be able to sell it on that. So I think the closer we get to that date, the worse things are for the Tories, which is why I think a summer election is the best option for them.
Summer would help turnout, which wouldn't help the Tories, though, on the other hand, as well.
That's true.
Although I think when it comes to the autumn, maybe autumn might be, because you also have the winter crisis in the NHS. That's going to really hit off, I think. So that's going to be damaged. Like, whatever way they decide, I think if they decide in the summer, autumn or winter, it's all going to look pretty bad for them.
Yeah, I was on a call the other day, and I can't go into detail because it's still under embargo, but people will see that the polling that's been done. This huge win that is being predicted for Labour, it's not quite right. Right, Femi, you may know this. It's PRP or RP something.
MRP, I think.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it's not the huge win. So when we look at those figures, it's more like 300 and something to, there's not the 60 seats of Labour. It's much closer. There's still a definitive win, but it's not that huge numbers that we are seeing, where people are just throwing out these algorithms now, oh, look what happens. Their methodology is based on larger surveys, then using that information on smaller areas and using the same sort of demographic information on age and education and all of that to kind of come up with more localized polling results. So that will be very interesting. So I think it's really important that people don't assume that it's just a done, and not put effort into, campaigning and tactical voting and stuff like that, because politics is a funny game and things can change overnight. One major perceived win for Sunak and the public, and things could be a little bit closer than we think. So we hope they keep messing up, but not so much that it's irreversible damage. I mean, that this is the worry. The longer it goes on, the more and more damage they're doing to the reputation internationally, and just trashing our society and our values. And I just say, bring it on. I think, the sooner the better, really. I would love to see one in 6 months' time. But
it's interesting to see what's going to happen with Northern Ireland. I mean, we were talking about the terror rate going up, but if it kicks off and there are bombs going off left, right, and centre, that's the end of. I'd like to think that's the end of Brexit. It's like, well, you've caused this. There's no other reason for this. There was the total peace for 20 years. And you guys have absolutely wrecked it with this insane policy that doesn't make any sense on any level. It's amazing because you've got significantly partly to blame for 200,000 deaths during COVID, pushed a herd immunity policy, which is insane, for a disease they didn't understand, which is clearly corporate manslaughter. And there have been lots of rumblings around on social media about taking to court over that recently. Then you've got the fact that the Conservative Party took millions off Putin's mates, which we're still waiting for another report on. Brexit has been a complete shambles and lie. None of the promises out of Brexit have come to fruition. Not one. I mean, even the immigration one. It's actually the illegal immigration skyrocketed, if you can even call it that. They're refugees at the end of the day, but they've spun it in such a way. They're using Nazi rhetoric I can show you the exact page where the word invasion is used to describe refugees by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. It's not even controversial to say that. I can show you in the book where he's saying those words, or the word swarm, or the word plague. And you're going, what is it? Like, what the fuck are people voting for? Like, why are they voting for any of that? It's total shit. Like, from top to bottom. If you're an extreme right winger, you're not happy. If you're on the left, you're not happy. If you're in the centre, just hoping for something to like steer the ship clear, it's not happy. We're stuck in the mud. So I'm going, why would anyone vote for any of this? It's a total shit show. The thing that sort of comes to my mind is I can see Reform Britain in part taking some of the votes away from the Conservatives, which would be terrifying for them. But I'm also, as we discussed last week, it's like I think Phil from A Different Bias said that there's a good chance that the Reform Party haven't vetted most of their candidates. And they're all going to be, there's going to be a few batshit ones in there who are literally just going to come out of the woodwork with some of the craziest shit. It's just going to nail the Reform Party. But on the plus side, it'll still take votes away from Conservatives. I don't get it. What the hell are people voting for? God,
I just want to ask Femi, do you know Sargon of Akkad?
You have a video where you call Chinese people
Yes.
and by all accounts, that
because
is racist.
Words have meaning, and you don't know what the meaning of that word was. You don't know what the context was, what the narrative of it is. That's the point.
It's broadly accepted as a racist term.
Yeah, I know. That's why I used it.
Have you ever heard of him?
No.
No, so he was a UKIP candidate for the European parliamentary elections. I think it was in 2019. And he had said some pretty horrible things about Jess Phillips, I think, and the whole campaign the whole interviews and everything became about him and his comments, and they left the UKIP. UKIP hadn't vetted him; they didn't actually know who he was. They just knew, oh, there's this young internet guy. Let's bring him on board, and he crashed and burned. You have the May elections, and this could potentially change how the Tories campaign in the following election, so in the general, because if they lose a lot of seats in the locals, you could see a new approach from Rishi Sunak, and that could affect. So whenever I hear about polling, I say, okay, wait until there's an actual campaign, because the polling is complete. You ask somebody a question today, would you vote for Keir Starmer, would you vote for the Labour Party? They'll say yes or no, but when the campaigning starts, and the campaigning is going to be pretty toxic, I think. Really toxic.
Do you think Rishi's got the ability to recover the economy?
No. I compare Brexit to like driving with a handbrake on. Like there's this 4% pull on the economy all the time. So, and it's going to get worse until you say to businesses, we're going to get rid of that, because they're not going to invest in Britain if there are barriers to trade. Nope. They're going to say, no, we're not going to move there. We saw it with British Volt. We saw it with Tesla. We saw it with AstraZeneca recently. They don't officially mention Brexit, but they moved to Ireland. What's the benefit Ireland has? Okay, lower taxation, but it's a member of the European Union and the single market, and it has access to the workers you need, highly skilled workers to work in pharmaceuticals. Britain, unfortunately, it's cutting itself off from a lot of this. And then not just the AstraZeneca company, what about all the satellite companies that provide services and raw materials and all sorts of things to that large factory? That's all gone as well.
The UK is basically uninvestable at the moment. It's like an emerging economy. It's not that, it's chaos. There's no stability in the politics, and anyone who's going to come from a different country and invest, they're not going to look at Britain. And the more and more the Conservatives, even with this immigration policy, and the one thing that really gets me about this immigration policy is that they constantly say illegal immigration, illegal immigration, illegal immigration. It's intentional. It's brainwashing the public. The public now don't even realize that it's not illegal immigration, and I think I'm really fed up of no one challenging that. Now in interviews, you're seeing MPs, particularly Conservatives, and I've even seen some Labour MPs come out with their accidental illegal immigration, or they're tackling illegal immigration. That's not illegal immigration. Illegal immigration is when you don't declare, or you've overstayed your visa, or you come into the, So I find that really worrying. But that is also going to put other countries off investing in us. This kind of populist
Prior state behavior.
Yeah, for sure.
So this kind of prior state behavior that we're doing. And I find it interesting that they even call it the illegal migration bill, because I mean, the United Nations has said it might be actually an illegal migration bill, and I think more people need to make a point about the fact that it's completely trashing our international obligations. My curiosity about the election is that, Lisa, you said about how the polling might not be as optimistic as the headlines might suggest. Does that? I can understand how that might mean that Labour doesn't get the majority that it might expect, but are we still comfortable in the sense of the Tories won't get a majority even with any reform?
It's still a fairly large majority, but it's only something around 120 or something like that. It's not 300 or 400, so it's still a large majority, but it's nothing like, I mean, the figures were like 300 and something to 200 and something. And they were both looked at from different perspectives, and there was hardly any drift either way. I'm happy to kind of tell you a bit more about that, but I'm sure we'll be seeing it because it's ongoing work, and I'm sure it will be released quite soon, so that it would be very interesting to see.
Would it, and I don't want to be a downer on this, but would it be bad for Labour actually to win a massive majority, a 300-seat majority or something? Because we'd like Labour to push through things like PR. Would he be more inclined not? Oh, well, we don't need actually PR at this stage because look at with this massive majority we have under first past the polls.
That's very much where I was heading, on the basis of I don't need Labour to get a huge majority. I just want a non-Tory majority. My ideal situation would be a hung parliament, so that the Labour feels forced to adopt more policies that essentially progressive people actually want, rather than feeling that they're so secure in their position they don't need to do anything we want.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? But then it'd be interesting to see what they'll do with if they did get that level of power. I'd be interested to see what they do with the House of Lords. I keep saying I want a dual chamber system, and the House of Lords to become PR, so that even if you don't get your vote in your constituency, your vote still counts in the Lords, and that you send policies through both houses simultaneously, and then you can have a constitution, because you can't. It eradicates some of the power of the Commons, and I think there's too much power in the Commons. I think it's a huge amount of power once you've got your majority. One of the interesting things that we saw with the Conservative Party, though, was so Boris generally had for about a year or two quite a lot of power because he had such a large majority. But then you started to find that all the backbenchers started connecting who was similar to them in views. And there seems to be about 80 backbenchers now that can come together and go, actually, we're a little bit more right than the majority of the party, and we can then push against some of these bills. And then there was this check in power that suddenly popped up within about 2 years. But that was also because Boris had knocked his own ability by partying, by all the scandals that he was involved in, as well as all the scandals the party was involved in. So it sort of knocked the shine out of Boris and allowed these backbenchers to coordinate together and go, I'm not defending them doing that. I'm just saying that if Labour did that, I could see a similar thing happening with them having their backbenchers come together in a year or two, realise that there's a significant group, and then be able to put a check. But that's still a lot of power. I mean, and let's face it, as you said, Lisa, Keir Starmer's not polling very well compared to Rishi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's boring, and he hasn't really come up with any decent policies.
Maybe he doesn't have to. That's the thing. Because I always say that the election is a referendum on the incumbent. So people are not voting for Keir Starmer. They're not voting for Labour. They're either voting for the Tories or voting against the Tories. So it's we saw that with Trump. Remember Trump in 2020? People were not coming out in droves to vote for Joe Biden because they liked Joe Biden. It was like, we want this guy out. And people who voted for Trump before were like, this guy is a failure. We voted him for him to shake up the system or whatever. And I think it's going to be the same with the Tories. So Keir Starmer probably is. That's, I believe, why he's not talking about Brexit. He's not talking about cost of living in the ways that we would like him to, because he doesn't want to rock the boat. And he says, "Okay, I have this. Everything is going well at the moment." And I think that was also part of the reason why he kicked Jeremy Corbyn out, because Corbyn was a problem for not so much for the Labour Party itself, but for the voters. The voters in 2019 said, I'm not voting for this guy. He's an IRA supporter, or he's an extremist, or he's a communist, or whatever idea they had, whether it was true or not, they said, we're not voting for this guy. So this is why he was kicked to the curb. And I think that's why Starmer is taking... I don't like it, and we don't like it, but I think this is his approach, is just don't rock the boat.
But this links to one of the big realizations I've had recently, and it was one of those many I told you so moments, that this realization, which is that for literally 3 years straight, we were told, if you stop Brexit, you will damage faith in politics forever. People who voted for the first time in ages came out to vote for Brexit, and if you take it away from them, they'll never believe in politics again. Tory voters, are they huge fans of the Tories right now? Labour voters, are they huge fans of Labour right now? This is the consequence of what we've allowing Brexit to happen, because you've got the Tories lying to people in ways that ultimately make those people poorer, so their voters are disillusioned with them. You've got Labour, that's supposed to be our hope for a new direction, refusing to stand up to the Tories due to political cowardice, and so Labour voters aren't particularly huge fans or inspired by them. And so the result of allowing Brexit to happen has been a massive loss of faith in both parties. And so, as you said, nobody's voting for Labour, they're just voting against the Tories.
There's an element of that. There's an element of the Tory scandals which aren't going to go away. And I can see that continuing and also knocking them. I can also see that there's another thing on the horizon that's going to be a very interesting one for the Brexiteers and how they feel about the Tory party. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Brexiteers push or go against this. And that's the CPTPP. So that's the, oh God, I know it's a Pacific Partnership, which is on the opposite side of the world.
Yes.
Go on, I can see loads of people nodding here.
Something progressive, transatlantic Pacific Partnership, is it?
Comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Progressive? Why are the Brexiteers getting involved? Do they know that it has
know.
progressive in the name?
You think they read what they sign up to, really, at this point?
Well, they don't. It's really interesting to use that word, because if you look back at the key events that have happened since 2019 with the Comprehensive Partnership in the Pacific, we're in the Atlantic. What the fuck? So on top of that, you can see there's been a progression towards having a centralized authority set up within the CPTPP. And you can see that they are already looking at how it's governed. They're already setting up commissions to regulate certain areas. There's no parliament. There's no voting on the governance. And it seems to be all based and centered on US law, which means that they're going to enforce a lower standard.
But surely there'll be a referendum to join it, right?
I mean, it's taking away some sovereignty. I mean, that was the whole thing about Brexit, right? You've got to have our sovereignty. And this is, every time you make a deal with an international organization, you agree to, adhere to certain rules and regulations, and, you're not allowed to do exactly what you want. So in theory, you are giving up a little bit of your sovereignty, whether that be with the WTO, whether that be with this, whether that be with any trade deal. So you're just swapping out one organization for another, and it's a poor swap out as well. As we know, 100 billion a year Brexit is costing, and this is going to bring in, as you say, 1.8 billion, and that's over 15 years, was it? Which I thought was once a year, so I was wrong with that even. It's not even that.
So it's funny, because I've been warning about this for a very long time, because back I think I did a video on the notion of global Britain back in 2018, about how distance matters. It's like the golden rule of economics. You do a disproportionately more trade with the countries that are physically closest to you. That's why America has its well, at the time it was NAFTA. I can't remember what it's called now, the North American Trade Partnership, something like that now. With Canada and Mexico, you've got the African Union, you've got ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. You've got Australia that gets a significant more portion of its food from China, all generally speaking local. And in those groupings that you can see, there's always, if you look at the actual agreements and the text that they've got, there's always some sort of reference to regulatory cooperation, mutual recognition, visa liberalization so that you have more immigration and ease of immigration between those countries. All of them basically cheap versions of the EU and heading in that direction as fast as they can, just trying to get there. So joining the CPTPP, it just seems like we're just doing something very, very stupid. We've joined a version of the EU that wants to be the EU, but won't get there, but yet doesn't seem to have the same democratic governance behind it.
Yes,
I know but the Brexiteers will say, oh, but it's about trade, because when we're in the EU, we had to follow rules about, safety standards and environmental protections. But I think if you look into the detail of this Pacific one, it's, you're going to have to follow rules as well.
It's the first time we've joined a bloc like this in about 50 years. There is strength in numbers, and yes, we have, remember, we have a relationship with the EU already. We've got an FTA, so this is adding to that.
But if the UK joins after, it will need Australia and New Zealand and others to allow it to enter. So there will be a loss of sovereignty, or there will be a loss of the UK will have to jump through certain hoops like any other country that wants to join it. But I think this is all a bit pointless to talk about, because I believe it was never about trade. It was about xenophobia. That's why we need to leave the EU, is to keep the foreigners out. So when it comes to Australia and New Zealand, they're like, oh yeah, we want to do more trade with Australia and New Zealand because there's something different about New Zealand and Australia than there is with Poland or Hungary or Italy or Spain.
It's like a yearning for empire, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're not considering environmental factors here.
No.
I mean, we are rushing towards a climate collapse, basically, and then we've got a great idea. We'll just bring all of our products from the other side of the world because we just got a problem with our neighbours. I mean, it's just cost-wise and environmentally wise, it's just ludicrous. And of course, we already know it's not great for British businesses and the trade deals they've done so far. Farmers in particular, food producers are just getting hammered, just getting screwed over left and centre.
So you're telling me that flying over cheap lamb from the other side of the planet isn't good for the environment?
Yeah, isn't it?
That's a shocker.
Shocker, yes.
You don't want it from Wales. That's protectionism.
Welsh farmers, for example, is one of their only industries. In Wales, they've got forestry farming. Lamb farming, I mean, they're going to take a real hit as well, and it's quite tragic.
It's one of those things that you could find. There are certain examples that you could cite if they wanted to go the protectionist route in certain sectors. So Kia, the car maker in South Korea, that was set up around a protectionist beginning. So the South Korean government protected the internal car industry, let that grow internally, and then release the barriers to allow Kia to come out and other cars to come in. And we could be doing something like that, but we're not, because you've got so many free trade Brexiteers. Yeah, that's a better term. Free trade Brexiteers. And you've got the economist, Patrick Minford, who they all seem to think is some sort of economic god. Yeah.
Is this the only one that agrees?
Sneering at that. How the hell's he kept his job at Cardiff Uni? I'll never know. But I mean, if you'd like to come on, Patrick, I'd love to hear from you. But the whole thing doesn't work because it just strips out industry, which is what he said. So I don't know what they're trying to do, because it's like you're stripping out your resources. I think we've become a cash cow to the EU. Because they're now they take what, 12% on the tariff, 20% on that, and the EU collects 80% of that, plus all the customs forms, which is about 215 million a year, and they're between 22 and 55 quid per form, depending on what you're knocking across. So I'm looking at it and going, the EU could just be looking at us as like a cash cow, and we're just pumping all this money in. They don't have to give it back. There's no rebate. They don't have to give us grants. They don't have to give anything to our museums. They don't have to give any subsidies to our farmers. They don't have to give any subsidies or grants to our students. They don't have to give anything to education. They don't have to give any poverty grants, insulation grants. Don't have to give any of that, and they're getting even more money. So I'm just looking at it and going, because I've been trying to work it out, the actual amount. I reckon it's probably about 50 billion a year that the EU are going to be making, but maybe it'd be 50 billion, 80% of 50 billion. But that's still more.
Alex, are you making a Brexiteer argument for Europeans? Stay out. We don't want you back.
Yeah. Keep us, just extract all our money out of banking. I mean, that's it. Unfortunately, that is. I've actually now written to the EU Commission to go, because I can't find the stats anywhere. Someone must have those numbers. So I've actually written to the EU Commission going, can you send me the details of how much money you made? Because they've gone up. So you've got details of the amount, which is nuts. But that means there's an extra 300 billion. Now you can take in inflation. But you're also going, if they're making 50 billion out of us, and they've got an extra 300 before the pandemic, our 50 billion could be propping up their economy or propping up the EU. And that also means all of our money is now going into grants that I just listed there to all the people inside the EU.
So you take that 50 billion as tax revenue, because obviously now you have to pay tax in the country where you're exporting goods and stuff like that, and also the form filling will be done by individual companies, but there's companies out there making a great deal of money from handling customs, for British businesses and handling their paperwork. For my business, we do it all in shop, but we were already importing and exporting quite heavily before Brexit. And it was a nightmare, but we have got around it, and eventually we brought it back up. But it's another staff member, and it's far more difficult financial, on the accountant side. We've got VAT registration now, France, Italy, Germany. just trying to ease the issues, but it's the paperwork side of it. So, on the account side and also on the warehouse side, it's another 1.5 employees, I would say, that it's cost my business just for Brexit.
So it's a false economy then?
Yeah, very much so. Very much
so. Like false tax, false economy, breakdown of business. I mean, I still don't see what benefit there is. Have they actually claimed anything other than making a powerful Henry Hoover? That could be like a super Henry Hoover. You turn into a cartoon.
I've got a Henry here. I think it's the best Hoover ever. It doesn't break down. It sucks up dirt, water, mud, dog hair. You just buy a new head for it. It's really simple. I am a great fan of the Henry Hoover.
We've now got a new religion. You are more than welcome to join in. All you have to do is say, "Hail the lava lamp."
Hail the lava lamp.
Hail the lava lamp.
Hail the lava lamp.
It's not a cult. It's a religion. The leader is already dead. He was never alive. Therefore, it's a religion. And then that's because there was also there was some Northern Irish community that kicked off about that they're unionists, and they kicked off about a sign being put up in Irish. And then obviously someone had just gone over there and just bashed it down and then thrown it away.
What's funny is the name of the town is Tobermoor, which is, the Anglicization of Tobermoor, which is big well. It just means big well in Irish. So the name of the town comes from Irish, and these people were complaining that there's a sign in the town that contains Irish on it. They said this is a Protestant town, and we don't. And the DUP representative said the people in this town don't condone Irish. It's like condone Irish.
I think everything just broke up.
Oh,
we'll go again. Can you hear us now, Femi?
No.
Femi, can you hear us?
I'm getting a connection saying your internet is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, clearly. Everything's fine.
I can hear you. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Russians.
Bye-bye.
Good to catch up.
Well, on that smooth ending.
Bye.